Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, actor, author, comedian, adventurer, and what more. Michael Palin will be with me again later in the programme, and it'll be a joy to welcome him. Plus, we hear about the Google war brewing in Central America. And we get the latest from Lebanon on the brink of a new civil war there. But first, the momentous events last week and this week in Tunisia. Some are already calling it a Twitter revolution after President Ben Ali was forced to flee the country following mounting protests, some of them organised and followed too by online users. But is the role of the internet overestimated, or can it actually play a role in promoting democracy and freedom around the world? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by cyber skeptic Evgeny Morozov, correct? What does that mean in...
It means the son of frost in Russian.
We deny it, actually, folks. We deny. Who has just written the book. Evgeny has written The Net Delusion, How Not to Liberate the World. How not to liberate the world. Now, also, Tunisian academic and media expert, Dr. Noureddine Miladi. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And first, very good to have you. Is this the first example of a tweet revolution?
Depends on what you mean by it. Some people refer to the protest in Iran in 2009 as a Twitter revolution. Some refer to protest in Moldova also in 2009 as a Twitter revolution. I think of all those three, I think Tunisia comes the closest, where social media seems to have played an important role.
More and closer to the thing. It's played a vital role, important role, vital role.
It did, yes. Again, we can talk about whether there are some downsides to it, whether if Ben Ali stayed in power, he may have been able to trace some of those activists who were exchanging messages on Twitter. Those are all questions for debate. But yes, it did play an important role in mobilizing people, I think. It's
yes, because you go back earlier in the century, and he seemed to be saying the right things, but he never actually did them. But Dr. Miladi, what do you feel? Does it have this power? Do they have the power to cause this change?
I think new media has had an instrumental role in this change. What has been going on in Tunisia, I think, is unprecedented in the region itself. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube have been very important tools in the hands of young people, university students, professionals who've been able, and human rights activists, who've been able not only to circulate information within the country itself, but also to take the horror of what has been going on in Tunisia to the rest of the world. And I think what is important to me, honestly, is the ability of these social networks to get the voice of those people to the international media and also international public opinion. Some of the images, for example, we've been seeing on international channels, Al Jazeera, BBC Arabic, France 24, Russia Today, and so forth, those who speak Arabic or report in the Arabic language. I think they've been relying very much on social networks for their footage, for some of the information, especially news about demonstrations and so forth. So I would argue in a nutshell that new media in this case has been really instrumental, and the proof of it is the revolution has taken place, Ben Ali has left the country, and now we are talking about people's power.
That's very clear what you're asserting there, and you don't go that far. You don't even go halfway that far.
Well, I think I go that far in the case of Tunisia. I don't go that far in generalizing what happened to Tunisia to the rest of the world. Again, I think what we saw in Iran, for example, in 2009, is that the government wasn't toppled, and what it did next was to actually go and analyze all those tweets, all those Facebook messages, text messages exchanged on mobile phones, and go and start prosecuting some of the activists who were using social media. It doesn't mean that social media was not effective, but I think the key lesson here is that the government does stay in power. They also have a much better capacity to crack down on some of the protesters.
This social revolution has been not driven by trade unions from the beginning, or from other outlawed or so-called outlawed political parties outside Tunisia or inside Tunisia, but it was actually driven by young people. I mean, the catalyst obviously was partly WikiLeaks. And when the WikiLeaks cables affirmed the deep corruption within the government itself, and it says that this is a mafia-type government ruling the country. And I think that's affirmed what everyone in the country had about the Ben Ali regime, his family and so forth.
So that in terms of what you're saying is that the social media had more effect anyway than you think Evgeny thinks, but at the same time, in this particular area, WikiLeaks actually has a share of the scalp, does it, in this?
It was a kind of a catalyst. And as I mentioned, everyone in Tunisia had a case or an example or experience of corruption from the entourage of Ben Ali and his family, especially his wife and so forth, with regard to a business they've been doing, or with regard to a human rights activity or political activity or what have you. Now, all of those stories, they were actually confirmed and reinforced by the WikiLeaks feeds. And that, I think, what's also made people even more angry. And that young person, Mohammed Bouaziz, who decided to set himself alight, to burn himself because he couldn't take his voice to the ministers, to Ben Ali, to other countries, to people around the world. He stayed for about 4 or 5 years without employment, being a graduate student from the University of Tunis. And tens of thousands of people like him, very well educated, they know how to use the internet, they know what democracy means, they know what human rights means, they know what it means to live in the 21st century. And I think that's what actually sustained this kind of, this I would call revolution in a way. So people over there actually knew exactly what they wanted, and they knew what is the ultimate goal.
Who are the countries who should fear the impact of the Twitter revolution, should fear the similar sort of revolution in their country, probably unthought of until this moment? Which are the ones? Who's next?
I think the worry should be signaled to countries which are lacking in terms of democracy, freedom of expression, which have problems with engagement of youth students in politics, and also providing enough jobs for young people. I think the case of Tunisia is interesting because it's a highly educated society. The university in Tunisia did very well in educating people, but the government didn't do well with regard to. But
what about people quote Egypt?
Oh yeah, I think that's probably it can be next. It can be Algeria. It can be Jordan. It can be Syria. That's why. I mean, recently, if you follow the meeting of the foreign ministers yesterday, this is exactly what it did hammer on. The case of Tunisia may have its repercussion on the Arab region, and those ministers that started to be worried and started talking about a kind of development project, right, engagement of young people, all that kind of stuff.
So we're saying who's next here. I mean, do you think there are countries that may be next, or are we again overemphasizing, as you might say?
There are plenty of countries that look like good candidates because of their economy and their political situation. They do not look like good candidates because of the fact that they have Facebook, right? In Egypt, actually, there was a Facebook revolution of sorts, in 2008, when a lot of people poured into the streets, partly mobilized by Facebook. Just 6 months afterwards, those protests fizzled, and they couldn't actually repeat it the year after, right? So a lot of this is driven by the grievances of the trade unions. A lot of this is driven by the grievances of, existing political movements. So we have to look to the politics, not to the internet penetration rate, to predict the protest.
Right.
I think a very important note is people in Tunisia, they were very specifically asking for a specific message to take down the government. In other countries, in Egypt, it's not the case. In Jordan, it's not the case. In Algeria, it's not the case. So I think the message in Tunisia was very strong, very crucial, and actually very instrumental in terms of deposing Ben Ali himself. But you mean in the other countries,
the aim is not the government in these protests?
I think it's not the head of the government himself, necessarily. Right. If you think about Egypt, for example, it's about the idea of not bringing in the son of Hosni Mubarak again, right. Jamal Mubarak, for example. The message in Syria is slightly different. The message in Algeria also is slightly different. So the focus in Tunisia was very, very clear, in my opinion.
Well, thank you both very much. That was a riveting survey, and we appreciate it very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now, from the Twitter revolution, let's move on to the Google Maps war. Last year, the internet giant published an erroneous map of the border between Costa Rica and Nicaragua, which appeared to hand the disputed island in the San Juan River to Nicaragua, who promptly invaded the island with 50 troops. When Costa Rica protested, Google withdrew the map, but Nicaragua did not withdraw the troops. They are still there. Costa Rica, of course, famously has no army. So what can they do about it? Well, I spoke earlier to the Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, Rene Castro. Mr. Castro, it's a joy to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you. One of the most famous surnames in South America, as we were saying.
Yes, it is.
But no relation.
No relation.
No relation. Now, tell me about, really, this has been simmering over the years, hasn't it? But it was, in fact, Google who sort of got it all worked up again, didn't it, by their faulty drawing of the map?
Well, this is the only explanation we have here so far. This is 2 months old. We had the Nicaraguan army incursioning and then occupying and building a man-made canal that will link the San Juan River, which is Nicaraguan, to the Caribbean coast through the Costa Rican territory. This is exactly what is happening now.
Right, and so what is going to happen next? I mean, the 50 troops, as we talk here, are still there, as far as we know. We haven't done any phone calls to say so they've fled or whatever else. But what can you do? Because as we said in that intro, famously, that you haven't really had a military army for more than 60 years and so on. Does that mean that with this row, it's possible you'll have to have one again?
Well, not really. Costa Rican people is more decided to keep its way of living. We went to the International Court of Justice demanding Nicaragua to withdraw. We asked the court to issue provisional measures and ask the troops to go out of the Costa Rican territory. In addition to that, Nicaragua has a station 1 kilometer from the Costa Rican invaded site, 600 strong men and helicopters and the whole military equipment. But we think that at the end, the International Court of Justice and the multilateral system of the UN will support the Costa Rican right of living disarmed and in peace.
How long will that take, do you think?
Well, at the court, the whole thing will take years, probably 4 or 5 years. Yeah. But the provisional measures, we are expecting them within the next few weeks.
Oh, that would be good news from your point of view. And why do you think, in this situation, that Nicaragua and its leader, Daniel Ortega and so on, took this particular step after the Google map incident and so on? Was it something to do with, in fact, Mr. Ortega's wanting to win that next election?
Well, he is already running, and certainly that has helped him to pull together his country behind a supposedly territorial claim, and the opposition is non-existent anymore. They disappear from the polls. And he has also said that he will not accept international observers to the next election. And in addition to that, there is a series of pharaonic projects that have been mentioned by him or members of the government, like a new interoceanic canal to compete with Panama and other things. But it seems to me that the most important one was internal politics.
Internal politics, that was the key to it all. And so who of the people we've been talking about can actually give you back the rights you feel you've lost? Is it in fact the Organization of American States? Is it in fact the UN? Is it in fact one of the other international bodies? Who in the end has got to press this to an outcome?
Well, I think all together. We went already to the OAS and we won a 22-2 resolution asking the countries to withdraw any troop or police force from that territory, but Nicaragua didn't obey. Now we are at the International Court of Justice, and Nicaragua has many other issues there with other countries, and so we hope that they will obey, because this is their preferred negotiating place or issues solved in place, and they are frequent users of the International Court of Justice. And eventually, if it is needed, we will have to go to the Security Council of the UN.
That's really the last step, is going to the Security
That's the last
Council.
step, and the Security Council will essentially implement the order of the court if the parties do not obey by themselves.
I see, and so that they would have to come in and, if the Nicaraguan troops, 50 of them wouldn't go voluntarily, UN troops would have to see them off the land, would they?
Well, hopefully that will be not needed. I think, the President Ortega will not disobey the court and disobey the Security Council, but we will go to whatever entity we have to go in the multilateral world to protect the Costa Rican sovereignty and the right of living in peace without an army. This is a decision that we claim is our right.
And then the end of all these stories should be, of course, and they lived happily ever after. Thank you very much for being
Thank
with
you,
us.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On Monday, the UN Special Tribunal for Lebanon submitted its first indictments in the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Though charges remain sealed, Hezbollah has acknowledged that members of the Shiite Muslim movement will be named in the investigation. So it is demanding that the government end its cooperation and denounce the charges. The government, led by Mr. Hariri's son Saad, refused, and in protest Hezbollah and its allies left the National Unity Government, bringing it down after 14 months, in fact, of relative stability. So what's next for Lebanon? Well, joining me now from Lebanon is the criminologist and expert Omar Nashabe, who was with us 3.5 years ago on this very same topic, and these things take time to come to fruition and so on. And at this particular moment in time, what do you think will happen in the next few weeks in Lebanon because of this?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. And I think that, the government of Mr. Hariri collapsed last week, as you just mentioned in the introduction. And we're waiting for the formation of a new government. Now, the recommendations will take place on Monday and Tuesday because according to Lebanese constitution, there's supposed to be recommendations from the members of parliament for naming a new prime minister. These recommendations addressed to the president, and the president afterwards names the prime minister.
In terms of what therefore happens, the basic thing is here that we've really always thought that a tribunal was the only way to get to the truth, reveal the truth. And at the same time, when we've had other countries in a similar position, like South Africa or Argentina or whatever, they had a sort of truth and reconciliation panel, tribunal, etc. And it does seem to some people that Hezbollah, for instance, they may want reconciliation, but they don't seem to want truth. They want it hushed up. Are you going to get reconciliation and truth, or is it too difficult to get truth at all?
Well, to get truth, you need a mechanism that functions according to the standards of justice. And I don't think Hezbollah does not want the truth. I think Hezbollah, on the contrary, Hezbollah gave another version of the truth. I mean, Nasrallah gave some elements that show Israeli implication. He said that he has credible information that actually point to the fact that there was an Israeli warplane or spy plane on location in the air on the same date and time of the assassination. So this is a sign that he's looking for a certain truth. And he said that this information is not conclusive, but he asked that there be a national commission that would look into this information. The problem is that Mr. Belmar there is no sign in Israeli media that there has been any investigator that visited Israel, considering also that Israel was involved in so many political assassinations. Like there are signs that Israeli Mossad agents from the intelligence have been involved in the assassination of Mabhouh last year, Hamas operative in in a Hamas official in Dubai. There are also many indications that many Israelis were openly involved in political assassinations in Lebanon. One of them, if I may recall, in 1973, Mr. Barak himself, Mr. Ehud Barak himself, who later became prime minister in Israel, assassinated Kamal Najjar and Yusuf Najjar and Kamal Adwan in Beirut. And they were very proud to say that they were part of a commandos operation that assassinated these three officials from the PLO. So there are signs that Israel might, and this was not taken seriously, this was not taken into consideration. That raises a lot of questions on the proper standards that are followed by these investigators.
But I mean, if the tribunal was to name as potentially guilty members of Hezbollah, what would that do to the political situation in your country in terms of peaceful civilian life?
Well, you see, Mr. al-Hariri enjoys and enjoyed a lot of popularity among the Sunni community. And there are fears, serious fears and concerns over the fact that if Hezbollah, which has a huge popularity among the Shia, Muslim Shia population, not just in Lebanon, but all over, and not just the Shia, by the way, but I mean predominantly within the Shia community, that would create tension between the Sunnis and Shia that could erupt in open bloodbath between the Sunnis and Shia, as is the case in Iraq, or as was the case in Iraq, I hope. And so this could be considered, and this is considered by Hezbollah, as a conspiracy to weaken the resistance against Israel, especially after 2006, when the resistance against Israel, represented by Hezbollah, was able to resist against Israeli aggression and surprise the world by being able to continue to fire missiles on northern Israel, despite the heavy bombardment of the Israeli Air Force and the Navy of Lebanese infrastructure, Lebanese locations, targets all over the Lebanese territory. And I think that since the Israelis, the conspiracy idea that is raised by supporters of Hezbollah is based on the fact that, well, Israel has failed to destroy Hezbollah militarily, and with its Western allies, it failed to actually create an internal problem from the government towards Hezbollah. And now it wants to try to actually benefit from an international justice in order to hit this resistance movement. Perhaps it would create some serious damage to this resistance, and then it is expected that Israel would actually launch an attack on the resistance in Lebanon.
Well, thank you very much for that wide-ranging coverage of the subject. We're really grateful to you for being with us, and we'll come back, and hopefully there will be in a few weeks, and hopefully there will be news of peace, perhaps. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us.
Hopefully.
Hopefully,
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you. And now, a change of mood, a change of pace. I'll be joined after the break by the one and only, the wonderful Michael Palin. That's in just a couple of moments.